I know the room where night refuses to end. I have sat in that chair that still holds the shape of someone who left, touched the calendar that counts debts instead of dreams, felt the pillow that remembers the salt of tears you thought no one saw. The future stretches before you like a hallway with no doors, and your body listens for footsteps that will never come. The air grows thin. Your heart carries its own winter. Your mind rehearses every loss with a precision that wounds you again and again. Even prayer feels like a door you cannot open, a language you have forgotten how to speak. I do not ask you to be strong. I sit here with you in the honest weight of this hour. I have been where you are. I have felt the ribs tighten around a heart that wanted to stop hoping because hope had disappointed too many times. I have known the mornings when rising from bed felt like lifting a mountain. So I will not tell you to smile or to see the bright side or to remember that others have it worse. I will tell you this instead. What you feel is real, and it has come to teach you something that words alone could never convey. You are not broken. You are breaking open. There was a time in my life when I thought peace meant the absence of pain. I was young, full of learning, surrounded by books and teachers in Kanya. I believed that wisdom was something you acquired like precious stones, something you could gather and keep safe in the vault of your mind. I studied the sacred texts. I memorized the prayers. I thought I understood God because I could speak eloquently about God. Then life came with its lessons, and everything I thought I knew turned to dust in my hands. My father died. The man I loved as a father, the man who taught me everything, left this world, and I was alone with my knowledge that could not comfort me, my prayers that felt like empty echoes in an abandoned mosque. I learned something then that would change everything. I learned that peace is not what remains when pain leaves. Peace is the breath you keep while pain is still present. Peace is not the absence of the storm. Peace is the eye within the storm, the still point around which everything whirls but cannot touch. I remember the night I understood this. I was weeping in my room, and the tears would not stop, and I was angry at my own weakness, ashamed that a grown man, a scholar, a teacher, could be so undone by grief. Then something shifted. I stopped fighting the tears. I let them come. I let the pain be as large as it needed to be. And in that moment of surrender, I felt it. A presence, not a voice, not a vision, just a quiet knowing that I was not alone, that I had never been alone, that even in this darkness, God was breathing with me, breath by breath. You see, we spend so much energy trying to escape pain. We run from it, numb it, deny it, decorate it with false smiles and positive thinking. We treat pain like an enemy that must be defeated. But pain is not your enemy. Pain is a messenger who has forgotten how to speak softly. Pain is the soul's way of telling you that something must change, something must die so that something new can be born. The caterpillar does not become a butterfly by avoiding the chrysalis. It enters the darkness willingly. It dissolves completely. And in that dissolution, in that surrender to the process, wings are formed. I place my hand on this table as I speak to you, and I feel the wood beneath my palm. The tree did not become wood by refusing to be cut. It became wood by enduring, by being patient, by allowing itself to be shaped into something useful, something that serves. Your pain is shaping you, not randomly, not cruelly, but with the same ancient intelligence that turns winter into spring, that teaches the seed to trust the darkness of the soil. You are not being destroyed. You are being prepared. Here is the truth that saved me, the truth I offer you now like bread for your journey. God is not absent in your pain. God is most present there, not as a judge waiting to see if you are strong enough, not as a distant king watching from a throne, but as the breath itself, as the heartbeat that continues even when you have forgotten to be grateful for it, as the quiet companionship that asks nothing of you except that you remain, that you stay, that you do not give up on the possibility that morning will come again. When I lost Shams, when the friend of my soul disappeared from my life, I thought I would die. I wanted to die. The pain was so immense that I could not eat, could not sleep, could not think of anything except his absence. For months I wandered like a madman through the streets. People whispered, people judged. But in that madness, something was happening that I could not name. The small self, the self that needed to appear wise and dignified and in control, was dying. And as it died, something deeper was being born. A self that could love without possessing, that could remain present without understanding, that could trust the process even when the process felt like annihilation. So I do not ask you to understand your pain. I ask you to stop fighting it. I ask you to sit with it the way you would sit with a child who is crying, not trying to fix it, not trying to make it go away, just being present, just listening, just allowing. Place your hand on your chest right now. Feel the rise and fall. That is God breathing you. You are not doing it. You are being breathed. Even when you cannot pray, you are being prayed. Even when you have no faith, faith is holding you like water holds a stone at the bottom of a river. Here is what I learned in the crucible of my suffering, and here is what I offer you as a practice so simple that your mind will want to dismiss it. For 3 breaths, say nothing. Just listen. Listen to the sound your chest makes as it returns you to life. Do not judge the breath as good or bad. Do not compare it to yesterday's breath or tomorrow's hope. Just notice it. Just be with it. In those 3 breaths, something ancient in you begins to wake. Not the you that has been wounded, not the you that is afraid, but the you that existed before the wound, the you that will exist after the fear, the eternal you that pain cannot touch because it is made of the same substance as God. I know you are tired. I know you have tried before and failed before and do not trust yourself anymore. I know the voices that tell you it is too late, that you are too broken, that you have wasted too much time. Those voices are liars. They are the voice of the false self that is dying, and it knows it is dying, and it is fighting for survival. Let it fight. Let it scream. You do not have to believe it. You only have to keep breathing. You only have to remain. The wound that teaches is holier than the comfort that numbs. The silence that listens is wiser than the noise that explains. I see you. I see the chair where you sit at 3 a.m. when sleep will not come. I see the bills on the table, the phone that does not ring, the mirror you avoid because you do not recognize the face that looks back. I see the courage it takes just to keep existing when everything in you wants to quit. That courage is not weakness. That courage is the beginning of your transformation. Do not wait until you feel strong to begin. Begin, and strength will find you on the path. I have fallen more times than I have walked steadily. I have returned again and again to the old refuge of habit, only to find its walls smaller each time, its comfort more like a prison than a home. I have bargained with God in the night and then blamed the darkness when the bargain was not honored the way I expected. I have called my fear wisdom, my exhaustion humility, my hiding maturity. There were years when I fed the very voices that were starving me, when I gave all my attention to the thoughts that diminished me, when I rehearsed my failures like prayers and wondered why grace did not arrive. Let me be honest with you about the nature of wounds. They do not heal in straight lines. They do not follow the timeline you set for them. I spent years thinking that if I just understood why I was wounded, the wound would close. I studied my pain like a scholar studies ancient texts. I analyzed my childhood, my relationships, my choices. I could explain exactly how I came to be the way I was, and still the wound remained open. Still, I woke at dawn with the same ache, the same questions, the same sense that something essential in me had been broken and could never be made whole again. I know you have tried to heal. I know you have read the books, listened to the advice, promised yourself that this time would be different. I know the shame that comes when you find yourself back in the same pattern, the same addiction, the same destructive relationship, the same spiral of despair. You tell yourself you should know better by now. You tell yourself that you are weak, that you lack willpower, that something is fundamentally wrong with you that cannot be fixed. I want to ask you a question, and I ask you to be honest with me and with yourself. How long have you been carrying the weight of believing you are too damaged to be loved, too broken to be healed, too far gone to start again? If this question touches something raw and real inside you, if you recognize this quiet war you have been fighting alone, write in the comments, "I am ready to begin again." When you share these words, you are not just speaking for yourself. You are lighting a candle for someone else who is sitting in darkness right now, someone who needs to know they are not alone in this struggle. Your courage to name your truth may be exactly what another soul needs to hear today, to take their own first step. Here is what I discovered in Kenya during the years after my father died, during the long nights when grief sat beside me like an unwanted guest who would not leave. I discovered that understanding your wound is not the same as healing your wound. Knowledge lives in the head. Healing lives in the body, in the breath, in the daily practice of choosing differently even when you do not feel different yet. I could tell you the story of every hurt I had endured. I could name the people who had failed me, the circumstances that had shaped me, the losses that had marked me. But the telling and the naming did not set me free. What set me free was learning to sit with the wound without needing to explain it, without needing to fix it, without needing to make it mean something about my worth. You do not need to pretend strength you do not feel. God lives in your weakness just as surely as God lives in your strength. In fact, I would say God is more present in your weakness, because weakness is honest, weakness is humble. Weakness knows it cannot do this alone. The self that pretends to be strong, the self that performs confidence and capability, that self is actually far from God, because it believes it does not need help, it does not need mercy, it does not need the companionship of the divine. But the self that falls, the self that fails, the self that cries out in the night, that self is already praying even if it does not know the words. I carried names for years that were never given to me by love. I carried the name failure because I had tried to build a life and watched it crumble. I carried the name unworthy because I had been rejected by people whose approval I desperately sought. I carried the name too late because I had wasted so much time in confusion and fear. These names became chains. They told me who I was allowed to be and who I could never become. They whispered their lies every morning, and I believed them because they sounded like truth, because they had been repeated so many times they felt like fact. Then one day, in the space between two breaths, in a moment of exhaustion so complete that I had no energy left to maintain the false names, I heard something else. It was not a voice in the way you might imagine a voice. It was more like a knowing that arose from beneath all the noise, and the knowing said simply, "You are beloved." Not because of what you have achieved, or how well you have performed, or how few mistakes you have made. You are beloved because you exist. You are beloved because the same force that breathes life into the rose and guides the planets in their paths has breathed life into you and is guiding you even now, even in this darkness, even in this confusion. I set down the false names one by one, not because I earned the right to set them down, not because I suddenly became worthy, but because I realized they were never mine to carry in the first place. They were given to me by fear, by shame, by the voices of people who were themselves wounded and did not know how to love without wounding. I set them down the way you would set down stones you had been carrying in your pockets for so long you forgot you were carrying weight. And when I set them down, I did not become someone new. I became someone I had always been beneath the burden. If you have relapsed into old patterns, begin again. If your anger returns like a tide, you cannot stop. Bless it for showing you where you still bleed, where you still need healing, where you still need to learn gentleness with yourself. The past is a teacher who can be thanked without being obeyed. You can honor what the past has taught you without letting it dictate your future. You can acknowledge the wounds without letting the wounds become your identity. You are not your trauma. You are not your mistakes. You are not the worst thing that ever happened to you or the worst thing you ever did. You are a soul on a journey, and every soul on a journey stumbles, loses the way, sits down in despair, and wonders if they can continue. Here is the practice I offer you for this day, for this hour. Write one sentence that begins with these words: "Today I am allowed to be," and then complete it with something tender and true. Today I'm allowed to be confused. Today I'm allowed to be tired. Today I'm allowed to be uncertain. Today I'm allowed to be healing slowly. Whatever you write, let it be permission you give yourself to be human, to be imperfect, to be exactly where you are without shame. This simple practice begins to loosen the grip of the false names. This simple practice begins to create space for the true name to emerge, the name God has been speaking over you since before you were born, the name that sounds like home. I will tell you an aphorism that arose in me from this understanding, from these years of carrying and then releasing the weight of false identity. The wound that teaches is holier than the comfort that numbs. Remember this. Write it somewhere you will see it. The wounds you have endured are not obstacles to your spiritual path. They are the path itself. They are the way in. They are the door that was always open, but you could not see because you were too busy trying to appear whole. Now you know you are not whole. Now you know you are broken. And now, finally, you are ready to be put back together in a way that is real, in a way that lasts, in a way that can hold both the pain and the beauty without needing one to cancel out the other. There comes a threshold where the will breaks like thin ice under too much weight. I reached it without ceremony, without drama, without the clarity of a moment I could point to and say, this is when everything changed. It was more like a slow dissolving, a gradual recognition that I could not continue the way I had been continuing. Food lost its taste. The meals I once enjoyed became obligations I had to force myself to fulfill. Promises I made sounded like rehearsed apologies even as they left my mouth. Silence, which had once been my friend and companion, turned into a wall with no doorbell, a presence that felt more like abandonment than peace. I asked the old question with new exhaustion. Where are you, God, when I cannot go on? Where are you when the night is too long and the morning brings no relief? Where are you when prayer feels like talking to an empty room and hope feels like a language I used to speak but can no longer remember? The room did not answer. The prayer returned to me like an echo that had forgotten the words, like a letter sent to an address that no longer exists. I waited for the dramatic intervention, the burning bush, the voice from the clouds. I waited for something outside myself to rescue me from myself. And the silence continued, and the days continued, and I continued, barely, moving through hours like a ghost moves through walls, present but not present, alive but not living. I will not sell you solutions dressed as pearls. I will not call your hurricane a gentle breeze or tell you that everything happens for a reason or that this pain is a gift you will someday understand. Some pain is just pain. Some darkness is just darkness. And the only way through is through, not around, not over, not by pretending it is something other than what it is. Here is what happened to me in that collapse, in that threshold where I thought I would finally break completely and be done with the exhausting work of existing. I stopped fighting. Not because I found courage, not because I had a revelation, but because I was too tired to fight anymore. I stopped fighting the emptiness and let it name me empty. I stopped explaining the grief and let it be heavy. I stopped trying to appear strong and let myself be exactly as weak as I felt. And something unexpected happened in that surrender. I did not drown. I floated. Not because I knew how to float, not because I had developed some skill or technique, but because surrender has its own buoyancy, its own physics, its own intelligence. When you stop thrashing in the water, when you stop trying to swim against the current, when you let yourself be held by something larger than your own effort, you discover that you were never going to drown in the first place. You were always being held. You were always being carried. You just could not feel it because you were too busy trying to save yourself. Between one heartbeat and the next, a remembering arose. Not a thought, not an idea, but a cellular knowing, a truth that lived in my bones before it lived in my mind. I am breathed. Even when I cannot pray, I am being prayed. Even when I have no faith, faith is operating beneath my despair like an underground river that never stops flowing. The same intelligence that instructs the heart to beat and the lungs to fill and the earth to turn is instructing me, caring for me, holding me in existence moment by moment, even when I do not feel held, even when I feel completely alone. If these words are touching something deep in you, if you feel this conversation is for your soul and not just for your mind, subscribe to this channel. Here I share teachings for those seeking truth, transformation, and the awakening of the heart. These are words for the ones who have tried everything else and are finally ready to try surrender. Activate the bell so my words continue reaching you in the moments when you need them most, in the quiet hours when you wonder if anyone understands what you are carrying. In that narrow, aching corridor where I thought I would lose myself completely, a small light insisted on continuing. Not a vision I could describe to others, not a miracle I could display or prove, just a thread of calm, thin as spider silk, but unbreakable, leading me forward one breath at a time. I followed it the way a seed follows darkness toward root, trusting a process I could not see, trusting an intelligence I could not name. I stopped asking so many questions and started making more room for the questioner, the one inside me who was asking, the one who was suffering, the one who needed companionship more than answers. I learned to pause at the edge of panic. Before, when fear would spike in my chest, I would either run from it or drown in it. Now I learned a third way. I learned to stop, place a hand over my heart, and count the slow return from storm to shore. I learned to ask my body what it needed right now, not what it would need tomorrow or next week. Right now, water, air, stillness, a walk in the garden, 5 minutes of lying on the floor with my cheek against the cool stone. These simple, almost embarrassingly simple acts became my lifeline. They became the practice that kept me tethered to earth when my mind wanted to spin into infinite catastrophe. Here is an aphorism that formed itself in those days of dissolution and reconstruction. What silence reveals, noise conceals. I had spent so much of my life filling every moment with words, with activity, with distraction. I had been afraid of silence because I thought silence was emptiness, and I thought emptiness was death. But in the Eidos, collapse, when I had no energy left for noise, when the words finally ran out and the distractions lost their power, I discovered that silence was not empty at all. Silence was full. Silence was listening. Silence was the presence of God closer than my own breath, waiting patiently for me to stop talking, long enough to hear the conversation that had been happening all along beneath the surface of my fear. The practice I offer you from this teaching is specific and simple. When fear spikes in your body, when panic begins to rise like water filling a room, pause. Do not run. Do not judge yourself for feeling fear. Simply pause and whisper these 2 words. Here I am. Say it to yourself. Say it to God. Say it to the fear itself. Here I am. I am not denying you. I'm not fighting you. I'm not pretending you do not exist. Here I am in this moment, with this feeling, in this body. Then ask your body, with genuine curiosity and compassion, what it needs right now. And whatever answer comes, if it is within your power, give it. A glass of cold water. 3 deep breaths. A moment with your face turned toward the window. This is not weakness. This is wisdom. This is the beginning of learning to be a good companion to yourself, which is the foundation of all spiritual transformation. I have known the room where morning never seems to arrive. I have known the calendar that counts losses instead of days. I have known the prayer that feels like shouting into a canyon and hearing only your own voice return. And I have known the moment, impossible to predict or control, when something shifts, when the heart remembers its own rhythm, when the breath becomes sweet again, when life stops feeling like a burden and starts feeling like a mystery worth exploring. You are closer to that moment than you think. You are closer than you have ever been, not because you have earned it or deserve it, but because you have finally stopped running and started remaining. And remaining is the secret that opens every locked door. The turning came when I understood something that contradicted everything I had believed about faith and transformation. I had been waiting for the feeling to arrive before I would act. I had been waiting to feel strong before I would be disciplined. I had been waiting to feel certain before I would trust. I had been waiting to feel hopeful before I would begin again. And in that waiting, years passed, seasons changed, my hair turned gray. And still, I waited for the right feeling, the right moment, the right alignment of circumstances that would make the difficult path feel easy. Then, one morning, in the courtyard of the mosque in Konya, I watched an old man prepare for prayer. His hands trembled as he performed ablution. His knees cracked as he lowered himself to the ground. His voice wavered as he recited the words he had recited 10,000 times before. But he did not wait for strength. He did not wait for certainty. He did not wait for the feeling of devotion to fill him before he began his devotion. He simply began. And in the beginning, in the act itself, something arrived that had not been there before. Grace met him in the movement. Presence met him in the practice. God met him in the showing up. I learned that day what no book had taught me. Faith is not what you feel. Faith is what you remain. Faith is the decision to keep the small promises you make to yourself and to the divine even when, especially when, you do not feel like keeping them. I had waited for warmth before I would pray, for clarity before I would act, for certainty before I would trust. But the order is different than I imagined. First, you remain. Then the warmth visits. First, you act. Then clarity follows like a loyal companion walking a few steps behind. First, you trust. Then certainty loses its importance because you have discovered something more valuable than certainty. You have discovered faithfulness. Here is the simple path that saved me, and I offer it to you, not as theory, but as bread for your journey, as water for your thirst. It is contrary to the noisy wisdom of our age that says you must do more, be more, achieve more, optimize more. This path is quiet. This path is slow. This path is built from 3 practices so small that your mind will want to dismiss them. But I ask you to trust what I learned through years of failure and finally, through the humble success of consistency. The first practice is conscious silence. Every morning before the world makes its demands, before the phone rings and the obligations crowd in, sit for 5 minutes in deliberate quiet. Set a gentle bell if you need a boundary. Sit with your back straight but not rigid, your jaw soft, your hands resting on your knees like 2 birds that have finally stopped flying. When your mind runs, and it will run, do not chase it. Do not judge yourself. Simply return to a single word: present. Let this word be a key that unlocks the door to this moment, not a cage that traps you. In this silence, you are not trying to achieve anything or become anyone. You are simply learning to be where you are, to listen to what is here, to notice the breath that breathes you and the life that lives you even when you forget to participate. The second practice is small daily order. Choose one act of discipline and presence that you will keep sacred. Make your bed slowly, with attention, with reverence for the simple act of creating beauty in a small space. Fold one shirt as if it were a prayer. Place a glass of clean water by your bedside each night as a gift to the morning version of yourself who will wake thirsty. These acts seem meaningless to the part of your mind that wants grand gestures and dramatic transformations. But order outside teaches order inside. When you bring care to the smallest corners of your life, when you treat the mundane as sacred, you are training your soul in the art of presence. You are building a cathedral, one stone at a time. You are learning that transformation is not a lightning bolt. Transformation is 10,000 tiny choices to honor life, even when life feels unworthy of honor. The third practice is service or gratitude. Every day, offer one concrete act of love even when you are tired, especially when you are tired. Send a message of forgiveness to someone you have held in the prison of your resentment. Wash a dish that no one will see you wash. Before sleep, name 3 gifts from the day with specific detail. The way sunlight moved across the floor, the taste of bread, the fact that your heart continued its patient work without asking your permission. Gratitude is the oil that loosens the hinges where the heart has rusted shut. Service is the practice that reminds you that you are not the center of the universe, that your pain, while real, is not the only pain, that you have something to give even when you feel you have nothing left. This path is not glamorous. It will not make you feel powerful or special or chosen. It is grain and water, day after day after day. But grain and water make bread, and bread keeps pilgrims walking, and walking keeps pilgrims alive. And alive, you discover that the destination you were seeking was not ahead of you, but inside you, not in some future moment, but in this one, not in some perfected version of yourself, but in the broken, stumbling, faithful version that kept showing up even when showing up felt like the hardest thing you had ever done. You can begin again. You can start today. You can start this hour. The desert you are crossing is long, yes, and the path is not always clear, but a path is a promise you can keep with your feet, one step and then another step and then another. Here is the aphorism that guided me through the years of rebuilding. Discipline is love in work clothes. Remember this when discipline feels harsh or restrictive or like punishment. Discipline is not your enemy. Discipline is love showing you how to care for yourself when feelings are unreliable. Discipline is love teaching you that you are worthy of your own commitment. Discipline is love in its most practical form, arriving before dawn to make sure you do not lose your way. The practice I offer you now is this. Choose one of these 3 steps today. Only one. Do not try to do all 3. Do not try to be perfect. Choose the one that calls to you, or the one that scares you, or the one that seems easiest, and then repeat it for 7 sunsets. Just 7. Not forever. Not for the rest of your life. Just 7 days of keeping one small promise to yourself. And at the end of those 7 days, notice what has changed. Not in your circumstances, not in the world around you, but in you. In the part of you that is learning, slowly, patiently, faithfully, that you can be trusted, that you can show up, that you are capable of more than you believed. Constancy makes a quiet music that the world cannot hear, but the soul recognizes immediately. After weeks of small obediences, after mornings of sitting in silence even when silence felt empty, after days of making the bed when no one was watching, after nights of naming gratitude when gratitude felt forced, I noticed a change that did not announce itself with trumpets or drama. The mind, once crowded with anxious thoughts that circled like vultures, began to unclench. The heart, once clenched tight against further hurt, learned a slower drum, a rhythm that felt more like breathing than like bracing for impact. The world did not become perfect. Pain did not disappear. Uncertainty did not resolve into clarity. But something fundamental shifted in my relationship to all of it. What shifted was this. The world became bearable. And then, slowly, in ways I could not have predicted or manufactured, the world became beautiful again in ordinary ways that I had stopped noticing. Light falling across a sink of clean dishes, turning soap bubbles into prisms. The first blank page of a new notebook, holding all the words I had not yet written. The smell of rain meeting dust after a long dry season, that ancient conversation between sky and earth. I felt God not as thunder, not as the dramatic intervention I had been waiting for, but as breath, near, constant, unafraid of my questions, present in the ordinary moments that I had dismissed as meaningless when I was searching for the extraordinary. Work found a different alignment. I did less, but the little I did carried more weight, more integrity, more of my actual presence instead of my frantic striving. Projects that had felt like burdens became offerings. Tasks that had exhausted me began to energize me because I was no longer doing them from obligation or fear or the need to prove my worth. I was doing them from a place of simple service, from the understanding that I had been given gifts not to hoard but to share, that my life was not my own possession, but a trust I had been asked to steward with care and attention. Relations with others softened in ways I had not thought possible. Apologies that used to require days of rehearsal and agonizing over the right words began to travel shorter distances. I could say I was wrong without feeling that my entire identity was collapsing. I could admit my limitations without shame. I could ask for help without believing that needing help meant I was fundamentally defective. The walls I had built to protect myself from further harm began to lower, not because I was no longer afraid of being hurt, but because I understood that walls that keep pain out also keep love out, and I was tired of living in a fortress. Money arrived with a strange new rhythm, not in torrents, not in the dramatic windfalls I had fantasized about, but with enough regularity and sufficiency that I could meet my needs and honor my commitments. More importantly, Money stopped being the measure of my worth or my security. I understood that provision comes not from my striving but from my alignment, not from my anxiety, but from my faithfulness to the small practices that kept my soul in order. When I ordered my inner life, when I created space for silence and discipline and gratitude, the outer life began to arrange itself according to a pattern I had not designed but could finally perceive. I understood why the dawn keeps its promise every single morning, not because it is dramatic, not because it is trying to prove something, but because it is faithful, because it does not question whether it should appear, because it does not wait for the right feeling or the perfect conditions. It simply comes, and in its coming, it transforms everything without trying to transform anything. The same darkness that seemed absolute an hour ago reveals itself to have been temporary all along. The same despair that felt permanent shows itself to be a visitor, not a resident. I whispered the truths that had proven themselves in practice, in lived experience, in the dailiness of showing up. When I ordered my soul, life also ordered itself. Not perfectly, not according to my plans, but according to a deeper wisdom that I could trust even when I could not understand it. The silence that I had feared as absence revealed itself to be the most present thing in my life. Silence was not emptiness. Silence was the teacher who taught me everything that words had failed to convey. Silence was the space where God could speak without competing with my noise. An aphorism rose from the well of these lived hours, from the accumulated wisdom of 10,000 small choices. Order is the lamp that teaches the night how to end. Write this down, remember it. When you feel lost in darkness, when you cannot see the way forward, when hope seems like a memory from another life, return to order. Make your bed, wash your face, drink a glass of water. Sit in silence for 3 breaths. These small acts are not distractions from the spiritual path. They are the spiritual path. They are the lamp you light with your own hands, the lamp that has been waiting for you to stop searching the sky and look down at what you can actually do right here, right now, in this moment. Another aphorism followed like a companion walking beside the first. Discipline is love in work clothes. I had thought discipline was the enemy of freedom, that structure was the opposite of spontaneity, that routine would kill my creativity and joy. But I learned that discipline is how love shows up when feelings are unreliable. Discipline is how love keeps its promise when passion has faded. Discipline is how love proves itself to be more than emotion, more than fleeting inspiration, more than the initial enthusiasm that carries you through the first days, but abandons you in the long middle where the real work happens. These are not slogans I invented to sound wise. These are footprints I left in the sand as I walked through my own desert. Follow them, and they will lead you to a clearing where your name sounds right again, where you recognize yourself not as the broken thing you feared you had become, but as the whole thing you had been all along beneath the layers of pain and confusion and false identity. The lamp you sought in the sky, the miracle you prayed for, the transformation you ached for. It was being built all along in your chest by your own steady hands, by your own faithful showing up, by your own quiet refusal to quit, even when quitting seemed like the only reasonable option. You are not broken. You are being reassembled by patience, not by force, not by willpower, not by the desperate striving that exhausted you for so many years, but by patience, by faithfulness, by the gentle insistence of small practices repeated until they become not what you do but who you are. The change you seek is already happening. It is happening in the moments you dismiss as insignificant. It is happening in the mornings when you sit in silence, even though silence still feels uncomfortable. It is happening in the acts of order you keep even when no one is watching. It is happening in the gratitude you name even when you do not feel grateful. Trust the process. Trust the practices. Trust that what you are building with these small stones will become a temple where you can finally come home to yourself. The practice I offer you now is this. Write one line you could live by this week. Not a line from a book, not a quote from someone famous, but a line that rises from your own experience, from your own knowing, from the part of you that has walked through fire and survived. Write it on a piece of paper. Place it where your eyes will meet it at dawn, where it will greet you before the world makes its demands, where it will remind you of the truth you keep forgetting. This line is your walking stick. This line is your compass. This line is the thread that will lead you home. Now I speak from a balance that still trembles like a bridge carrying its first travelers, like a flame that has learned to burn steady but remembers what it was like to almost be extinguished. I do not speak from the false certainty of someone who has arrived at a destination and will never struggle again. I speak from the honest uncertainty of someone who has learned that the spiritual path is not a straight line from suffering to peace, but a spiral that returns you again and again to the same lessons at deeper levels, teaching you each time something you thought you already knew but are only now beginning to understand. I am grateful for the dessert because it taught me thirst, and thirst taught me where the water lives. I am grateful for the nights when prayer felt impossible, because they taught me that God hears the prayers we cannot speak, that silence itself is a form of communion, that presence does not require words. I am grateful for the failures because they shattered the false image I had of who I needed to be and revealed the truth of who I already was. I am grateful for the wounds because they became the very places where light could enter, where grace could reach me, where transformation could begin its patient work. The lesson is simple, and it does not flatter the part of us that wants to feel special or chosen or exempt from the universal human struggles. Here it is. Pain purifies when it is honored rather than denied. Silence teaches when it is kept rather than filled. God never departs. Only our attention departs. Only our awareness wanders. Only our presence becomes fragmented by fear and distraction and the endless noise of a world that profits from our forgetting who we truly are. I know this not from theory, not from books I read or scriptures I memorized, but from the road I walked, from the miles I traveled on bleeding feet, from the mornings I woke and chose to begin again, even when beginning again felt like the cruelest joke the universe could play. Hold this truth like a small candle you cup with your hands against the wind. Feeling is a visitor. Remaining is a vow. The feeling of hope will come and go. The feeling of faith will rise and fall like the tide. The feeling of strength will be present some days and absent on others. But remaining, the choice to stay, the decision to keep showing up even when every feeling tells you to quit, that is the vow that builds a life, that creates a foundation strong enough to hold you through the earthquakes of existence. Keep the vow with tiny fidelity. Sweep one corner of your room with full attention. Guard 5 minutes of silence each morning, as if those 5 minutes were the most important appointment of your day. Offer one kindness that costs you a little pride, that requires you to step outside the fortress of your self-protection and acknowledge your shared humanity with another soul who is also struggling, also afraid, also trying to find their way home. When you fail, and you will fail because you are human and failure is part of the curriculum, begin again without drama. Do not make your failure mean something about your worth. Do not let one stumble convince you that walking is impossible. The soul grows not through perfection, but through faithful returning, through gentle stubbornness, through the refusal to abandon yourself no matter how many times you lose the path. Let me leave you with words that feel like prayer, that sound like the truth I whispered to myself in the darkest hours when truth was the only light I had. Silence is also an answer. When you beg for guidance and the heavens seem closed, when you cry out for direction and receive only more questions, remember that silence is not abandonment. Silence is the pregnant pause before birth. Silence is the winter that precedes spring. Silence is God making space for you to hear your own wisdom, to trust your own knowing, to stand on your own feet not because you must do it alone, but because you are finally ready to discover that you are not alone, that you have never been alone, that the companionship you sought outside yourself has been inside you all along waiting for you to become quiet enough to notice, and with another truth that steadies the long waiting. God is not late. You are learning how to wait. This is crucial. We mistake God's timing for delay. We mistake the season of preparation for punishment. We mistake the silence for absence, when silence is actually the deepest form of presence, the way a mother is silent while a child sleeps, watching, attentive, protective, near. What pain did not destroy in you, it purified. What silence did not explain, it healed. What waiting did not fill with answers, it filled with patience. And patience is the soil where every lasting transformation grows. You have walked through the fire, and you are still here. Your breath still moves in and out. Your heart still keeps its ancient rhythm. You have survived everything you thought would kill you. And now you stand at a threshold where you can choose to continue forward with what you have learned, with the wisdom you have earned through suffering, with the humility that comes from being broken and discovering that brokenness is not the end but the beginning of becoming truly whole. The path I have shown you is not complicated. It is 3 simple practices: silence, order, service. It is the decision to remain faithful to these practices, not because they feel good or because they produce immediate results, but because you have chosen to trust the process, to trust the ancient wisdom that transformation happens slowly and requires our participation, our patience, our willingness to show up day after day, even when we cannot yet see the fruit of our labor. This is not a path of escape from your humanity. This is a path of full embrace of your humanity in all its messiness and beauty. This is not a path that requires you to transcend your emotions or deny your struggles. This is a path that asks you to bring all of yourself, the broken parts and the healing parts, the doubting parts and the faithful parts, and to trust that all of it belongs, that all of it is welcome, that all of it is necessary for the becoming that is trying to happen through you. If this message has resonated in your soul, if you feel that these words were somehow meant for you in this exact moment of your journey, I invite you to subscribe to this channel and be part of this awakening. Each week, I bring wisdom for those who have chosen the path of true transformation, for those who are no longer interested in quick fixes or empty promises, but are ready for the slow, honest, faithful work of rebuilding their lives from the inside out. And leave in the comments these words: I choose to remain. This simple declaration is not magic. It will not solve all your problems or erase your pain, but it marks something important. It marks the moment when you stop waiting to be rescued and start participating in your own healing. It marks the beginning of your journey back home, back to the truth of who you are, beneath all the wounds and the stories and the false names you have carried. It marks your return to yourself, and there is no greater homecoming than that.